Hello, chat. Hello, hello. Welcome back to Bug Hunt. Logan. Flumgoon, Ella, Leonard, Logan, Danny, Alexis, Nikki, Vic, Donkus, Sparrow, Starberry, Bika, Sparky, Roxers, Purgatory, Goth, WM Besser, hello. Hello. How are you all doing this evening? Turtle Sack. Sam, Mini Pearl. Welcome in, welcome in, welcome in, everyone. I hope you've been doing well since our last chats. I did finally get the recap up from last week's episode. So if you haven't yet checked that out in the Discord, !bugcord, and it is the Chats Library channel, where you can see the links to things that we've talked about in many, many weeks past. So any of the insects that we talk about tonight, or themes or topics or whatever, I try to post additional information there for you to be able to reference back and check up on later. And if you miss a chats, you can always then watch the VOD and then catch up that way. So there is that. Water all over the ground for some light rain, so eye shine might be tough. Okay. Ella, how's my day been? It's been good. So typically I do pre-chats over on my Twitch channel. So just before this, for about 2 hours, we'll typically learn about Beetle ID and look at some things under the microscope. And we were not able to do that tonight. My museum that I work at, we have a really big team of researchers in town right now. And tonight was the group dinner. So I wasn't able to make it this week to pre-chats, but rest assured we will resume next time. But yeah, it's been good so far. Busy day, but quite nice. Amanda was streaming as well, so you all should go follow her and check those out. Did the ants make it? Yes, they did, Gracie Paws. They moved in that night. So we don't have any video of it, but they are happy in their new nest. Amanda stole my time slot. Yeah, that's fair. It is always Amanda's fault. But for serious, y'all should go follow Amanda. She does great streams, quite fun. So I like to hang out in there when I get the chance. Any news? Any fun bug sightings or bug questions that you've come across in the last week? I've got one that I'd like to talk about, but I always prefer to go to you all for questions and things first. Just because things that you're curious about might not be the things that I'm talking about. So if anybody has seen anything good or come across anything interesting in the last week, designated bug saver at your job. Love that for you, Ella. Start reporting those in the Discord. Start posting those things. New moth species in Portugal. Okay. Winter snow has shooed them away. Well, we're almost getting to the time of year where I get to talk about winter active bugs and how they survive in the cold temperatures. Starberry, that's a good question. So why, was going to ask Bugcord, why can wasps sting and live, but bees usually can't? So, The only bees that die after stinging are honeybees. Your bumblebees are totally fine. Your leafcutter bees, your sweat bees, all of those things are just fine after they have stung. Honeybees, in particular, have a barbed stinger. So it's sort of like a fish hook. They have a little bit of a backwards point on them. So when they sting, that barb sticks into the skin, and then the whole process that kind of happens after that is that the venom gland rips out attached to the stinger. And so, from the bee's point of view, it has just attached a poison harpoon to you that you're not able to get out because it's barbed, and the muscles in the detached venom gland will keep pulsing to keep putting venom into you. So the effects are still there after you have already been stung. And this does, unfortunately, usually kill the honeybee. But remember, honeybees are highly social, and they're doing everything for, like, the good of the hive. Those worker honeybees don't have the ability to pass on their genetics, so they're not able to reproduce on their own. The only bee in the colony that is reproducing is the queen. So this always gets complicated when we talk about it, but there's the queen bee who produces all of the workers. Those workers are her daughters, but those daughters are actually 75% related to each other, rather than like the typical 50% relatedness that you see in excuse me, rather than the 50% relatedness that you see in human siblings. So they are more likely to do things to preserve their genetics and help for the good of the colony because they have a higher degree of relatedness than like you or I do to a sibling. So for the honeybee, it makes sense because if they're like sacrificing themselves and stinging for the good of the hive, they're still benefiting the hive as a whole. So yes, honeybees have barbed stingers, so it sticks in and then rips out after they've stung. But all of the other bee types that I've listed, and wasps for that matter, have smooth stingers. So they are able to sting repeatedly and not die afterwards. So that was actually a very good question. Where do mosquitoes go when it isn't summer? I know that the eggs can just wait until it's warm a bit, but for that long. Yes. Yes, for that long. It depends on the types of mosquitoes and what their temperature thresholds are. In warmer parts of the US at least, there are mosquitoes active year-round because they won't need that high of temperatures. They just need enough other animals to be active for them to be able to get blood meals. But for things up in the northern parts of the US, like Alaska has really, really terrible amounts of mosquitoes. And they will lay their eggs at the end of fall or at the end of summer. And yeah, the eggs basically just sit dormant for months and months and months and months. And then when the rain comes or it warms up in the spring, they get that external cue to hatch. And that hatching usually coincides with the large mammal migration, so like the caribou and things like that moving across the tundra. So as those mosquitoes come, or as those caribou come through, the mosquitoes go, oh, this is perfect, and then they're able to hatch out to be able to go feed on those caribou. So yeah, they can last many, many, many months without water. As long as they're still in the egg, they're basically tightly sealed and protected. So yeah, it can be many, many months. Insane amounts of green lacewings in your backyard. Gnat level density. That's very cool. We had a sample come in at work today that had a spongilla fly in it. It's a relative of the green lacewing, but it's in the family Caesuridae. And their larvae are aquatic and have this really long nose, so it sort of looks weevil-y, but they feed on freshwater sponges. And then their pupa is like this really crazy lace structure. Spongilla fly. Just in the notes for later. And I'd never seen one before. They're a pretty rare little neuropteran because you need to have good habitat that has freshwater sponges for the larvae to feed on. And so we finally got one in on the sample at work. And I was quite excited by that, to get that one in today. But I'll post pictures and stuff in the link, like I said, later in the recap. But in exciting neuroptera news, like gnat level lacewings. Taking entomology class from University of Alberta. Oh, great! Yeah. I know a couple of people that have taken that, and I've heard good things. So that's very exciting, Ella. Catching up Misukisu? No, you didn't miss that much. Ooh, Roxers, thank you for the link. Nope, that's the right one. They look very similar to like a brown lacewing, but if you scroll down there, the larva has this really, really long, pokey mouth. Is winter like buckle? Must be tough being an insect. Yeah, so Teal and Besser, those are excellent questions. This is the correct time of year that this usually comes up. It's not that cold at Alveus right now, but yes, the only land animal that is native to Antarctica is the Antarctic midge. So it's a little tiny fly that breeds in like the algae and the seaweed on the edges of the continent, and then goes through a very stark deep freeze cycle. So yes, hibernating through winter with its blood freezing, yes. And they will overwinter, I think in the egg stage, maybe even in the larval stage. But they have special properties in their... I'm losing it. Hold on. Insect blood. Hemolymph. That took me an embarrassing amount of time. So in their hemolymph, they essentially have an antifreeze system. So they're able to sustain even like Antarctic winter temperatures. And then be totally fine. But that was a really interesting case of what we were talking about last year, when we got into cold weather stuff, is how they sync up to figure out like when they need to come out. And just like we were talking about just now with the mosquitoes, there are environmental cues that allow them to in synchronous hatch with the conspecific, so with all of the other midges, so they don't like mistime it, and they're able to mate with each other when everything lines up properly. And so this often happens in the midge. I think they have a 2-year, or at least a 2-winter larval life cycle, because the first year they will grow and feed and hatch again. They will survive through another winter, and then their second winter, all of the other ones that had been born in the year previously will be ready to emerge and hatch all at once. And so that's how they get around the fact of like, hey, we need to breed. There's a very limited time window here in Antarctica to do this. How do we sync everything up? It is... Oh, we're getting hanked, I think. That's millipede motion if I've ever seen one. Hank's wild cousin, Frank. He can keep y'all entertained while I keep talking about this life cycle thing. But yes, so then their second spring, the degree days. I saw someone post that, and I'm glad you guys have been paying attention the past couple of weeks. The temperature needs to get to a certain threshold for a certain number of days, and that is the thing that will like snap and trigger all of these things to emerge at one time. And the reason that they need degree days and not just like one warm day is because, you know, in the middle of winter, you might have it warm up 20, 30, 40 degrees above where it was the day before. And if all of the insects went, oh, great, it got warm again, let's emerge now, the next day, when it goes back to being cold again, they'd all die. So they need to have a certain number of days or a certain temperature for a certain number of days for them to have that internal trigger of like, okay, it is time to come out now. And it's the same thing you'll see with like plants and, you know, mammals and snakes and turtles and everything else that kind of comes out of hibernation. It's usually a prolonged elevated temperature of some sort that gets them to come out. Is it possible to knit or crochet a sweater for a jumping spider? I think you would need very tiny crochet hooks. The spider could probably make a pretty cool tiny sweater for you, but I also think it would be hard to alter a sweater pattern to have 8 arms. Russian. I'm late to chat because I had to relocate a brown recluse, I think, outside. I was terrified the whole time. Well, congratulations. Given your chat message, I can see you survived the ordeal. And brown recluses are one of those hot topics. A lot of people have a lot of stories about brown recluses, and a lot of them, as a professional entomologist, don't make a ton of sense. A lot of folks that claim to have been bitten by one occur outside of the normal range of brown recluses, so there's that. And then oftentimes they're like, oh, well, I can see 2 little pinpricks in my skin. And if you imagine this little tiny spider that the body is like maybe 6 millimeters and the legs are maybe about the size of a quarter, US quarter. I'm sorry, Europeans and elsewhere, I don't have a good reference for how big a quarter is in metric, but it's not that big of a spider. There wouldn't be defined fang punctures from that. You would need something like wolf spider size, if not bigger, in order to see visual like fang imprints. So brown recluses are severely, severely, severely misunderstood. I kept one, or I've kept them as pets for many, many years, and I'm still here. I've never even come close to being bitten, so. And I did also live in their range for a while. Actually, when I first moved to Kansas for my master's, I was moving into my new apartment, and I was putting some cleaning supplies away under my kitchen sink, and there was a brown recluse in there, and I immediately scooped it up, and it became a pet. And then I had that thing for like 4 years. It was great. The Hanks really do be the MVPs of winter chat chats. We get a lot of fun millipede sightings out here today. So we had that one just there crawling along the window, but now we've got at least... There's one here under the main flower, and I think there's a worm off to the right-hand side, because I see some more movement going on down there. Look at him go. Has there ever been a mass kill-off in a region because it's unusually warm for a long spell during the winter? I would say probably. I can't think of a good example off my mind right now, but I'm sure that's happened. Especially, you know, with global warming and everything and how seasons are shifting. The winter diapause for a lot of insects is actually shortening because it's starting to get warmer earlier in the year. So yeah, I'm sure that has been a problem at some point, but I can't think of a specific example. How spiders are able to produce silk? What would be the human equivalent of that? Uh, I I don't really think there is a human equivalent of that. It's like an extra secretion that they're able to make. You know, it's like they produce an extra substance that we just don't. Um, they have silk glands, so it's just like your salivary gland or your sweat glands or anything like that. It's a gland inside the abdomen that attaches to these little spinnerets on the outside, which are like the little fingers. But under a really high magnification, they sort of look like a hose nozzle that they're able to control how much and like where the stickiness comes out with the silk. Um, so yeah, it's just a totally different system that we don't really have an equivalent of. Millipede's drinking. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Alright, catching up, catching up, catching up. What's the smallest bug you can see? It depends on how good your eyesight is. But, insects can get a lot smaller than you think they can. Um, the smallest insect in the world is this family called Mimeridae. They're known as fairy flies. And they are parasitic wasps that are parasites on other parasite eggs, so they're hyperparasites, which is really neat. But they are the smallest known insect in the world, and they are like 0.1 millimeters long. 0.1 millimeters long. For those of you in American units, that is 0.0059 inches. So, super, super, super ridiculously tiny. And there are some individuals. Yes, Harry. Exactly. I think you must know the picture that I'm talking about then. There is a picture that we'll post in Budcord where there is a tiny wasp next to an amoeba, which is a single-celled organism, and the amoeba is bigger by like quite a bit. So they are the smallest. They're the smallest insect. Period. The smallest non-parasitic insect is this thing called a feather-winged beetle, and Maya has talked about them on stream before. I know, at least when she was doing the. She did a show and tell thing with, or like an animal reproduction thing with Adapt. She also did one with Hassan at one point. They're the smallest non-parasitic insect, so they're out there feeding on fungal spores and things like that, and mold in dirt and fungus and things. And they are about 0.18 millimeters long as opposed to 0.13 for the wasp. They're more in the level of like 0.3 millimeters, so giant compared to the wasp, but still very, very, very small. And as I post pictures of both of these later, you'll notice that both of them have feathery wings. Like, the wing is not a full membrane like you expect from other insects. And that's because they are so small that they don't really need the same air dispersal to be able to fly compared to some of these other things. They are lighter than like the gravitational pull through the air, so they're basically able to support themselves and control their direction floating through the air like a feather. Which is why, they're called feather wing beetles, because their wings are very, very reduced and kind of just edgy, like feathery. And you'll see that a lot in these really ridiculously tiny insects, and it's because, again, they don't need the full membrane to cut through the air current, essentially. J7, hello. Welcome in, welcome in. Alright, let me catch up on some of these questions here. Maybe I'll just slowly move ranges north because of temperature change. Yes. Ooh. We just got chat. Flew right at our face. Misu, that's a cool one. I learned at the San Diego Zoo that millipedes are born with only like 6 legs, and as they grow, they get more legs. Are there any other cool bug life stages? Yes. There certainly are. That one is a pretty dramatic transition because, as they get older, they get longer and add more and more legs. But I think even your simplest, most basic life cycle of like a butterfly is pretty remarkable because they have to go through that pupal stage where they turn into the cocoon or the chrysalis and come out the other side as like a whole new reformed organism. And we think that this separation of like the separate lifestyle of having a larva that feeds on something drastically different than the adult is the key to the really high diversity that you see in those groups. So beetles do that, wasps do that, flies do that, butterflies do that. And those are some of the most diverse lineages of insects, because if there ever is a food shortage or anything like that, you're not directly competing with your own offspring for food resources. And because of that, the caterpillar is eating the leaves of the plant while the adult is feeding on the nectar. You're not competing, so you're still able to reproduce when there are food shortages. And essentially, hopefully, by the time they grow up, the shortage has been covered. There are lots of really cool caterpillars. Antlion larvae are really cool. So yeah, the short answer there, yes, Misu, is that there are very other cool bug life stages, but the basic outline is you have egg, larva, pupa, and adult, or you have egg, nymph, adult, where the nymphs look more or less like the adults, just without wings, and that's where you see things like grasshoppers and praying mantises and true bugs. So think like aphids and cicadas. All of those, their babies more or less look like the adult thing, and they do compete for resources. So immature grasshoppers feed on the same thing as adult grasshoppers. But I think in the complete metamorphosis, where it goes through the 4 stages, any of those things is a pretty remarkable life stage to me, because it has to go through this crazy transformation to become an adult. Caterpillars didn't metamorphosize, would they be considered myriapods? No, not enough legs. The segmentation on myriapods is quite a bit different than you see on insects. Insects only have a 5 segmented leg, and myriapods, I believe, have 7. And the distribution of like where those legs are, obviously on the myriapod it goes all the way down, while on the insect the legs are only ever on the thorax. So caterpillars will oftentimes have this really large section of their body that doesn't have any legs on it at all. Ice pod. Ice pod on the cactus. Bug puberty. Yeah, basically, they go through a really dramatic change like that. Thank you, Tortilla. Thanks for the link. Size of the text on a penny. That's a good reference, Granola. Also, hello. I don't know if I saw you in here yet. Rebel. I keep finding jumping spiders in the break room at work to catch them and put them in the warehouse, but I'm not sure if it's the same one that keeps coming back. Depending how far away it is, it's probably different ones. I don't know where you're located, and you don't have to offer up that information, but it is that time in the US where it is starting to get colder in some places. I mean, some places it's been cold for a while. But depending where you are, it's more likely that you will see multiples coming in, just because they find like, oh, here's a little bit of an opening, and then once they get inside, they realize that it's a lot warmer than it is outside, so they'll kind of try to hunker down in there. I would doubt if it's like you're moving them across several hallways and parts of the building that it would be the same one. But I'm not really sure. Bugs like our heating systems. Yeah, and it's not their fault that they get inside. It's frustrating on our side of things. Even me, whenever there's a bug that is inside my house that I did not purposefully bring in, I still get like that little bit of a, huh, what was that? Like, why are you in here? Sort of thing. So even after 10 years, I still get slightly startled by things when they're not supposed to be in the house. And that's really on us for having like unsealed windows and door cracks and things like that. They're just doing their thing, trying to make it through winter, and yeah, the inside of my house is a lot nicer than it is outside. So I don't really blame them, but I do understand how frustrating it can be sometimes. We got worms. Little slippery guy. Out on the move. Invasive earthwormies. Yeah, Sam. So I know it is true that most of the earthworms that we have in the US are non-native. I have always heard that all of them were invasive, or at least introduced. But I don't 100% know that. I know the vast majority of them are, and so that's a pain in and of itself. But I will certainly look into if there are any native worms here. Because, It feels like there should be, or at least some. But I know, especially in the Northeast, they've like completely changed the soil dynamics by, uh, changing the texture and composition of the soils. So worms are not technically bugs, and I personally would never call a worm a bug. But we'll go with it for you. We will look up worms this one time. So much rain is letting the worms climbing up the walls like your hay shed. That's pretty cool. Climbing without arms is pretty great. This whole last year I pasted a random nature fact at the end of my weekly company-wide email for the schedule. And that's awesome. That's awesome, Rebel. Isu, invasive versus non-native. That is a very good question as well. So as we talk about different species across different chats, you will probably hear me say invasive. You will also probably hear me say non-native or adventive or introduced or exotic. And a lot of these mean a very similar thing, but not like completely. So invasive is used and should only be used when there has been a demonstrated, meaning like backed by a scientific study, negative impact on native species in the area. So things like spotted lanternfly are definitely invasive because they kill a lot of these native plants. Things like emerald ash borer are invasive because they are actively killing native ash trees. But other things that we have that come in aren't necessarily, have not at least yet been proven to be having a negative impact. So if we've heard about the Joro spider, which I think we've talked about on here a few times at least, it's this big orb-weaving spider that was found in and around Atlanta in 2014, and has since spread a little bit further around Georgia. It's made it to South Carolina now, I believe. There has not been a demonstrated, like, scientific study showing that those are invasive, meaning that they're having a negative impact on native species. Yes, it is another predatory species introduced into that area. Introduced. We'll circle back to that. It's another predatory species that is now found in that area. So, are there a lot of prey item insects that are getting fed upon by this non-native species? Probably. But Joro spiders are in the genus Trichonephila, and we also have a native Trichonephila here in the southeastern part of the United States called the golden silk orbweaver. It is just as big as the Joro spider. It is naturally found in the same areas as the Joro spider. And so, at least anecdotally, from entomologist friends that I have in the area, that they haven't noticed a significant decline in the native giant orb weaver. They have noticed an uptick in the Joro spider, though, but nobody's really figured out if it's bad yet. And those other categories, like exotic, means that it's just not from here, and you're not really making a category judgment or any sort of statement on how it got here, or if it is good or bad. I have a hard time with the question, is this, is X species good or bad? And a lot of that is because it is context dependent, depending where in the world you are asking that question from, and like what your intentions behind it are. So exotic just means not from whatever area that you're in. Introduced usually comes with the connotation that humans in some way assisted it to get to where it is now. And that could be, oh, this was brought over on a ship and it was hiding in some cargo and we didn't notice it, but now it's like across the world. That is an unintentional introduction by humans. But then we have intentional releases. One of the things that we breed for invasive species control where I work is this thing called the air potato beetle. And it is a little tiny leaf beetle that feeds specifically on this plant called air potato. Air potato is an invasive plant here in the southeastern part of the United States. And what has been done is that folks went over to the native host range of air potato, figured out what was feeding on it, and then did so many trials with native plants to make sure that this beetle wouldn't get introduced and then all of a sudden like switch hosts and start eating one of our native plants. It was cleared for introduction, so these are beetles that we brought over intentionally from Asia to help us deal with this very highly invasive plant. And that was a very purposeful introduction. And we do that a lot. It's called a biological control mechanism. So if there is a new pest that shows up, a big first step, if we are trying to control them in some way, is to go back to wherever that introduced species is from and try and see what's preying on it. With a plant, you need a leaf beetle, or you need some sort of thing that'll eat plants. But another big thing that we do is Asian citrus psyllid, which vectors citrus greening, and the citrus industry is a huge deal in Florida, where I'm currently based out of. And so we did the same thing, except beetles are not eating citrus psyllids, but you know what does? Little tiny parasitic wasps. So we went over, we caught them in native range, and I say we, I did not do this. To be very clear, I did not do this. But scientists went over, collected them in their native ranges, and found wasps that are hosting on this insect specifically. There was, again, a very long and very complicated trial period where they made sure that it wouldn't feed on any of the native stuff. And then eventually it's being bred for purposeful introduction to take out this other plant pest. So introduced usually has the connotation of humans did it either intentionally or not. Adventive is another term that gets used a lot. And that one is like, it had not been reported here previously, but now it's here, and we don't really know, or we don't really think that it was humans doing the moving. So like we were just talking about earlier, and I saw someone else mention it in chat, with like ranges of things are expanding northward with climate change. You know, where it used to be too cold for certain species, it is now warm enough for them to exist in some of these places. And everything kind of is retreating a little bit further north. So things that need it cold, their southern limit is now further north than it was because it's not getting as cold in some of these southern areas. So adventive means that its status has changed in some way. There are a lot of Caribbean insects, so things from like the Lesser Antilles and from all those islands that are, you know, southeast of Florida, that have been recorded in Florida over the last few decades. And some of that is with permanent northward expansion, but we also see a really heavy influx of newly reported species after a hurricane. And hurricanes are, you know, a natural process, it's a natural weather phenomenon. And these little buggies from the Caribbean get blown across the ocean in the middle of the storm and land in Florida all of a sudden. They might not establish, you know, it might be like an individual, and it might be a male of that individual or an unmated female. Not everything that gets found in the US gets established in the US. So a lot of these things that do get blown over from across the ocean are adventive because they are currently in a place where they historically had not been. But nobody is sitting there, you know, in the Caribbean anywhere throwing beetles into the hurricane like, ha ha ha, we're going to send this to Florida. We're going to send this across the ocean. Nobody's doing that. And so, yeah, using the terms introduced, exotic, adventive, invasive, all of these things do tend to have different connotations. But the big distinction that I would really like to make sure comes across is the definition of invasive, meaning that it has that negative impact. Because there are a lot of things that do show up in the US, or that have shown up in the US over the last many, many years, that are not from here, but they're not necessarily doing anything bad. You know, nobody would call the air potato leaf beetle invasive because the only reason that it's here is because we purposefully brought it here to deal with a plant that is invasive. So yeah, those terms, in short, that wasn't very short. I talked about that for quite a while. But in summary, that is the difference between those two groupings of words. People throwing insects into a hurricane. Well, listen, it might happen. I don't think it does, but it might. Is this bug missing a hind leg? It is indeed. We are looking at a 5-legged cricket right now. Oof. Struggling. Take it out of its misery. It's not fun to look at, chat, and I recognize that. It doesn't. There seems to be something else going on besides just missing the back leg, because I have seen plenty of insects missing a leg that do not struggle this much. So there might be something else going on with this cricket. It's just hard to, it can't use its back leg like it would otherwise because it won't be able to hop in a straight line. So it's trying to currently move around with just those 4 front legs, and I think the awkwardness of like the hay substrate and the lack of having one of those back legs is making it look worse than it actually is. If this guy can make it back out to the middle of the pasture where it's a little bit more rocky, I think it would have a much easier time getting around. But I just think this uneven surface plus the missing limb is not the best. But like it's going. It's going. Why is one of its legs so big? That's a good question. Endless questions. This is a cricket, so this is in the order Orthoptera, which includes things like grasshoppers, crickets, katydids, all of those sorts of insects that do tend to jump quite a bit. So one of the defining characteristics of that order is having an enlarged hind leg for jumping. This is called a saltatorial leg. Saltator in, or saltator, I think, in Spanish is jump. So the adaptations for jumping is called a saltatorial leg. And you see this enlarged leg in things like grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. So jumping is one of their main ways of getting around. So that's why it has this one big leg. It should have a second one on the other side, but unfortunately this guy seems to be missing this one that's going on. That's happening right now. So not the easiest chat, and I know that, but it is something that happens. And one of those rats that's here will probably have a feast at some point tonight. And everyone just put your 07s in for the cricket. Hopefully he makes it, but if not, he will feed another important member of the food web. Insects, as much as we love them, do in fact play a really important role as a food source for other organisms. So at the end of the day, fulfilling that role is not the worst thing in the world. But I do know and I do recognize that it is not always pleasant to see. So, thank you for your service and your education, Mr. Pasture Cricket. Back up. There. Hey, Igloo. Poop Boy taking all the poop from the beetles. Chandler's doing too good of a job mucking these days. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. I did have an insect news thing that I did want to cover because I think it's really, really cool. So I think we will wrap up with this. This past weekend, for those of you that have either seen it on my stream or however you learned this information, I went down to Orlando, Florida this past weekend. And I was fortunate enough to collect a new to me family of beetle. Now, I've been working with insects for like 10 years, and I've been working on beetles that entire time. Finding a new family at this point is pretty rare for me. It doesn't happen very often. And this thing was really cool because it was a family called Belidae, Belidae, and they are known as cycad weevils. A cycad is a type of plant that sort of looks like a palm tree but isn't. And the reason that they're called cycad weevils is because the males. Oh no, there's a rat. He's going for the cricket, guys. He's going. Look at him plotting. Donkus, no, cycad. So Cycad. Um, and anyway, so these weevils are in the male cone, essentially, of these plants. They're feeding on the pollen that are inside of the male cones before it goes in and matches with the female cones. So Florida has a native cycad called Zamia integrifolia, and it is very complicatedly, it is vulnerable in the state of Florida as like a wild plant. It is considered threatened or vulnerable, but it is also one of the most common landscaping plants on college campuses. So I was in Orlando returning some stuff at a local university down there, and just outside of their bio department, there are tons of these cycad plants. And we went out, we found the male cones, and we just started breaking them up into a little white pan, and there were tons of beetles in there. Not only did I get the weevils that I was after, and that was like the whole reason for the trip, was going down to try to find these things, because the male cones of this species are only emerging this time of year. So I went down, I got the ones I was looking for, but then I also got these little fungus beetles that have switched evolutionarily off of fungus onto the pollen from the cycads. So these two things are very, very tightly associated with the life cycle of this cycad plant. Little did I know that just a day or two before I found these beetles, there was a new paper that came out in the journal called Science. Science is one of the most impactful, meaning like the highest impact journals. So when a journal has a very broad topic like science or nature or medicine, that is usually like the top of research. And so in Science, just 2 days before I got down there to find these beetles, there was a really excellent paper published in Science about Rhopalotria, which is the genus of weevil that I was finding, and also the fungus beetle that is also in the cycads. The paper was detailing, and I will post this again in the Discord so you guys can read it. It was detailing the heat-seeking abilities of these beetles. I'm going to let that sink for just a second. But the cycad has this really remarkable biology that when the cones are opening, they're also actively putting off heat. They're making a warmth signature that is unlike any of the other plants around. So it's sort of like corpse flowers and things like that that put off a warm signature when they're ready to flower to attract their pollinators. And so there was this new study that showed up that was like, hey, these beetles have very specific and very well developed sensoria, which are these little groups of sensing hairs and pits and glands or whatever on their antennae that allow them to pick up on the heat signatures given off by these plants. And the really cool thing, I mean, that is phenomenal in and of itself. It is a very cool thing that they figured out now how these weevils find these plants. They're heat seeking. They find them based off of the heat signature that the plants give off, which is ridiculous and ridiculously cool to start. But second, one of the things, at least, that I took away from this is that the fungus beetle and the weevil are about 200 million years apart evolutionarily. And to me, and again, I have done nothing to test this. This is just one of the questions that arose when I was reading the paper. Is what seems more likely the fact that two separate groups would independently evolve the same heat-seeking technology 200 million years apart? Or is heat-seeking a baseline character that other insects have that can be upregulated or downregulated in the genome to essentially match whatever their life cycle is? There are ground beetles that tend to reproduce in really, really high numbers after fires. There are jewel beetles that seek out recently burned wood to find places to lay their eggs. But the mechanism for those two is slightly different than what they were talking about in these weevils. So I think it's going to be really cool, now that we know this information, to see if we can pull apart genomes from other insect groups and see if this heat-seeking section of the DNA is present or not, and basically be able to see which levels are present, if they're there or not. So that was the very cool and very timely insect news that we had this week. Like I said, I could not believe that popped up 2 days before I went down and found the exact beetles that they were talking about. So in the recap, I will post the paper, and I will also post pictures of the process of finding these weevils and these other beetles this weekend. So with that, I think we are going to wrap it up. We had a lot to talk about. We sped through that one, but it's always fast when we're having fun. Ain't that right? So, as always, I would like to thank you all for being here. Ooh, granola. Wait, what? Oh, and update. They're good. They moved in. They moved in off stream, so nothing we could do about that, but they do seem to be enjoying their new house. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Logan, for being our wonderful camera operator, as always, and zooming us in on all of our little friends throughout the hunt. Tortilla posted the link, but join the Discord if you have not already. It is Alveus community, but it is the bug-loving Alveus community. So people will post things that they see throughout the week. I posted some really cool specimens this morning that I got to see at work today. But I'm happy to answer questions and identify things in there for you throughout the week. So if you have a pressing question that you just can't wait until next week's chat chats, you're more than welcome to post it in there. So check that out. In there is also a role selection channel that, if you are so inclined, you can set up notifications in your Discord for when I go live on my Twitch channel. I typically stream Mondays and Wednesdays, but occasionally we'll throw something else in there. So if you want more entomology content, I have a microscope that gets hooked up to the Twitch stream, so you're able to see what I'm seeing, and we get to look at a lot more in detail on some of these specimens, and I'm happy to answer questions there as well. Also, join the Clips channel. Please follow that. It has just turned 1 year old. And it is run by one of our community members, so it highlights some of the best animal moments that you might miss while you are at work or asleep. And second to lastly, this week, stick around for rounds. So in about an hour, we are going to check on the animals one more time before bed. Make sure everybody's all good, and it's a nice way to round out the night. Logan will take care of that. And then lastly, for this week, as a reminder, there is extra special collab, some are saying even stream of the year, happening this Sunday at noon on the Alveus channel. What is this stream, you might ask? It is the Evan and Dr. Julie combined collab chat chats. Our plan is to talk about sociality, Dr. Julie's specialty, but sociality in terms of how the mammal sociality is different from insect sociality. So we will have a theme. We are planning to spend some time with the marmosets. We're planning to spend some times with some of the bug ambassadors. So I think it's going to be super fun. I hope to see you there Sunday at noon after Chandler is done mucking in the morning. So crossover chat chats, insanity. Hope to see you there Sunday. I hope to see you in the bug cord. And I hope to see you here next week for another Alveus Bug Hunts. Good night, everybody. And I will see you on Sunday. Bye, chat. Have a good night.